Hello and welcome to Restoration DIY. In this episode I'll be making a bowl, a bit different to my usual epoxy and wooden blank, so let's get into it. To start with, I cut some ash and Padook strips at around 3mm for the ash and 8mm for the Padook. These will form part of the main feature in the bowl. I had previously cut the main timber blank. I'm not sure what species it is. If anyone can tell, leave a comment below. To each part of the blank I glued a strip of ash, then a strip of Padook, then another strip of ash. These were then firmly clamped and left overnight to let the glue set. It's the next day and the glue appears to have set up nicely. So after trimming off the excess, it was on to the next stage. For this I would be adding an epoxy resin insert, so I would need to form a mould of sorts to contain the resin while it cured. I used a sheet of HDPE underneath the blank, and then I used hot melt glue to seal one half of the blank to the sheet. Then I used some offcuts of MDF covered in clear packing tape to form a dam at each end of the section I would be filling with epoxy. I used copious amounts of hot melt glue to seal all the edges and joins, but having done something similar to this before, I knew that if there was the tiniest pinprick of a hole, the resin would find it and leak everywhere. So I added packing tape around the whole thing, which I taped down to the HDPE. Even with all this, I wasn't convinced it wouldn't leak. Sealed up, I mixed the epoxy resin. I hoped one batch would be enough. The colour of choice for this project was ocean blue. The epoxy resin is my usual brand, mixed at a 2:1 ratio for 2 minutes, then the coloured mica powder is added, then mixed for a further 2 minutes. Filled the blank with the epoxy, and wouldn't you know it, yeah, it leaked. I didn't get much of that on camera. I had to move quickly to stop the resin escaping, using a combination of paper towel and more packing tape. I managed to stop it leaking, but I had to mix some more resin. I stood with it until it gelled and left it overnight. It's the next day, and you can see where it leaked on the top right hand corner. Thankfully, it didn't get beyond the edge of the HDPE, so cleanup was straightforward enough. After releasing the blank from the mould base, I marked a circle on top and trimmed off the excess on the bandsaw. Blank cut, I mounted it to the lathe using the woodworm screw and locked in place with a tailstock. Then it was time for turning. As usual, for a start, I just needed to get the blank to round. For this, I used the freshly sharpened Simon Hope 3/8 bowl gouge. The lathe is spinning at around 850 RPM. With the blanked around and nicely balanced, I began shaping the base using the 3/8 bowl gouge, using a combination of push cuts and shear scraping. I decided to form a foot on this bowl, nothing too deep, just enough to lift the curved base. I had to bring out the 1/2 inch bowl gouge for this. The timber, whatever species it is, was very tough. The skew chisel came into play to fine tune the foot and blend the curved base into the sides, but tear out on the end grain was becoming a big problem, so I broke out the large negative rake scraper, which got rid of most of it. There was still a bit of work to do on the outside, but I decided to cut the mortise in the base. For this I used a thin parting tool to define the outer edge, and the bowl gouge to remove the bulk of the inner material, with some fine tuning from the skew chisel and a dovetail cutter to finish it off. With the mortise done, I went back to finishing the outside. Tear out was still an issue, so I sharpened the skew chisel on a diamond card and set to gently removing material. With the tear out under control, I added super glue to the edges of the epoxy resin. There were some bubbles that formed and I needed to fill them. I think the wood had some moisture in it from the glue up, and this bubbled the resin as it heated up and cured. A lesson for next time, I think. The skew chisel removed the excess glue and then I sanded, this time from 80 to 400 grit. After sanding, I cleaned down with denatured alcohol, applied sanding sealer and denibbed with a non-abrasive Scotch pad. Then Yorkshire grit, abrasive paste, 2 coats this time just for good measure. All cleaned away before adding Yorkshire grit, fine abrasive paste, 2 coats cleaned off with paper towel. And to finish, Novus Fine Scratch Remover. This is just to add shine to the epoxy resin. I'll be adding a final finish once the inside is done. So with the bolt turned around and safely clamped in the 4-jaw chuck, I set to hollowing out the inside. I used the 1/2 inch bowl gouge to start off with, but this had lost its cutting edge. I persevered for a while, but I had to revert to using the 3/8 gouge. This did okay, but it needed a session on the Tormek sharpening stone as well. But all was not lost. If you have been watching any of my previous videos, you'll know I've been expecting a delivery. Lurking in the background, a new tool was waiting. Yes folks, it had finally arrived. The Easy Wood Tools full-size finisher in all its glory. purchased this specifically for my epoxy resin projects, and it's true, a sharp gouge could have easily finished hollowing out this bowl, but I felt there was just enough epoxy to justify a trial run of this new tool. The full-size finisher was great at removing material, but it was chipping the epoxy resin quite badly, though it could be improved. I had previously purchased a negative rake cutter for it, so I swapped that for the standard cutter, and what a difference that made. What tear out there was disappeared, and there was no more chips in the resin. The new carbide cutter was more than capable of stalling the lathe, so care had to be taken not to dig in too much, but it was easy to control and a welcome addition to my collection of wood turning tools. I used the large negative rake scraper to remove the tool marks, and the carbide cutter to take out the bulk of the material, being careful to check the thickness of the bowl. A final check and a fine tune from the carbide cutter, and it was ready for sanding, same as before, from 80 to 400 grit. After a thorough clean down with denatured alcohol, I applied sanding sealer, which was denibbed with a non-abrasive pad. Followed up with Yorkshire Grit abrasive paste, just a single coat this time, for a comparison with the 2 coats applied on the outside. Then 2 coats of Yorkshire Grit microfine paste, cleaned away ready for the Novus fine abrasive paste. The Novus paste was just for the acrylic, and I only applied it to that part of the bowl, but inevitably it gets everywhere when I clean it off. I decided to use Hampshire Sheen microcrystalline wax as the final finish on this bowl. There was a lot of wood, so I wanted to make sure it was sealed. Well, there you go, that's another project finished. This was a lessons learned exercise. I took a lot away from this one. It will all help to make my next pieces that much better. So with that, I'd like to thank you for watching, and if I could ask you to give me a thumbs up, subscribe, and comments are always welcome. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye for now.